The Appalachian Mountains are old enough to remember every footstep that has crossed them. Before roads, before trail markers, before maps tried to flatten them into lines and names, these ridges were already doing what they have always done, hiding things in plain sight. Locals do not call it magic. They call it judgment. A bad stretch of woods. A place where sound changes. A hollow where the dark feels thicker than it should. Modern hikers may use different words, but the stories are the same. A shape at the edge of a headlamp. A voice that sounds almost human. Tracks that stop in the middle of wet ground. And always the same detail that ruins everything. It almost fits, but not quite. Tonight, we cover 3 encounters from the mountain corridor. The first happened in eastern Kentucky, on a logging road so narrow that 2 trucks could not pass without one backing up into the brush. It was late October, after the leaves had turned and the hills had gone loud with dry wind. The witness was a 41-year-old trail surveyor named Caleb Vance, a man who spent most of his life reading terrain the way other people read faces. He knew deer sign, raccoon trails, coyote scat, the smell of fresh rain on shale. He did not believe in backwoods stories. He laughed at them, usually. On that night, he was walking the ridge alone with a rangefinder and a radio clipped to his vest. His job was simple: mark a boundary line before dark. The sky was already gone when he noticed the first wrong thing. Footsteps. Not behind him, ahead of him. He stopped, the steps stopped. He took 3 more. The steps ahead answered in the same rhythm, as if someone invisible had learned his pace and was matching it 1 beat late. He called out once, thinking a coworker was joking with him. Nothing answered. Then the steps moved again, not away, not toward him, but parallel to him through the brush, always keeping the same distance from the road. Caleb clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam into the trees. The beam caught trunks, dead ferns, pale bark, and then something that looked like a man bent down low between the saplings. It had the shape of a person on hands and knees, but the limbs were too long and too narrow, bent in the wrong places, as if the joints had been assembled from memory. Its back rose and fell in a slow rhythm. Its head stayed angled toward him even when the body shifted sideways. Caleb froze. The thing took 1 step. Then another. Not forward, around him. It moved in a half circle with the soundless ease of smoke, never breaking branches, never snapping twigs, never disturbing the leaves that should have screamed under that weight. Caleb swung the flashlight harder, and for 1 split second he saw the face. There wasn't one. Only a pale oval where features should have been, smooth and wet-looking, as if something had started carving a face and stopped halfway through. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just a blank place that still knew exactly where he was standing. He ran. He made it down the road to his truck, locked the door, and drove 5 miles before he looked in the rearview mirror. Something was crouched in the back seat. He almost drove off the embankment before he realized the seat was empty. Empty except for a line of muddy prints across the upholstery. 4 prints, long-fingered, human in the wrong way. The second encounter took place in West Virginia, near an abandoned fire lookout above a drainage basin locals still call Hollow 9. It happened in early spring, when the snowmelt turned the creek black and the trees looked like bones against the sky. The witness was a woman named Erin Maddox, a volunteer with a search and rescue team. She was not a frightened person. She had found lost children, hypothermic hunters, and one man who had been stuck in a ravine for 14 hours with a broken ankle and a pocket knife for company. She knew the woods could play tricks. That was why she did not panic when she heard crying. It came from the old trail below the lookout, thin and breathless, like a child trying not to wake anyone. Erin shined her headlamp down the slope and called out, asking who was there. The crying stopped. Then a small voice said, "I'm cold." The voice was young, too young. Erin started down the trail, moving carefully around the loose stone. She found the source near a collapsed marker post at the edge of a ravine. Something sat there with its knees tucked up to its chest. At first glance, it looked like a little boy wrapped in a gray blanket. Then it lifted its head. The blanket was not a blanket. It was a skin of damp leaves and black mud clinging to a small, thin body that should never have held itself upright. The arms were too long for a child. The fingers ended in dark points, like twigs sharpened by water. The face was turned partly away, but Aaron could see enough to know it was wrong in the same precise way as a cracked mirror, not broken, just misassembled. She asked it where its parents were. The thing made a sound like a wet cough and pointed behind her. Aaron turned. Nothing stood there. When she looked back, the child-shaped thing had changed positions without a step, now closer than before, its head tilted at an angle that made no sense for a human neck. It was smiling. Not with its mouth. With the skin around the mouth. Aaron backed away, her boots sliding on the wet rock. She dropped her radio. The thing made a soft clicking noise, almost like teeth touching together, and then it unfolded. That is the only way she later described it, unfolded. The small shape stretched upward in a single silent motion, growing taller and taller until it was nearly the height of the lookout stairs. The leaves slid off it in clumps, revealing a body too thin to belong to anything living. Its limbs were folded backward at the joints. Its shoulders seemed to sit too high, as if the thing had been built from the wrong diagram. And still the face remained blank, pale, smooth, unfinished. It took one step toward her. Aaron did not remember climbing the trail back up. She only remembered the sound of her own breathing and the feeling that something was moving just behind her at the exact same pace, close enough that she could hear leaves touching skin, but never close enough to see it. When she reached the lookout, she slammed the door shut and shoved a metal file cabinet against it. She stayed there until morning. The strange part came later. There were no footprints below the lookout, no sign of a child, no drag marks, no broken branches, but her dropped radio, which she found on the trail at sunrise, was still on. The channel was dead except for one burst of static. Buried inside the static was a voice whispering her name. The third encounter was recorded, if that is the right word, by a retired forest ranger named Owen Price in the mountains of North Carolina. He had worked the same district for 29 years. He knew bears by their tracks and poachers by the smell of cigarette smoke left in the rain. He was the kind of man who trusted evidence and distrusted stories. That changed the night he checked a broken fuel station near an old service road. The station had been shut down for years, but the generator shed still stood, and the gravel lot still held the shape of vehicles that no longer came. Owen went there because a motion sensor had tripped 3 nights in a row. No trespass sign, no camera footage, just the alert. He arrived just after midnight. The lot was empty. The floodlight above the pump station was dead. He crossed the gravel with his flashlight and found the first sign near the door of the shed, a single lantern sitting on the ground. It was old-fashioned, the kind with a metal handle and cloudy glass. It was lit. Owen looked around for the person who must have dropped it. No one. He called out once, then again. The woods answered with a silence so deep it felt deliberate. Then he saw the light moving. Not the lantern. The light behind the lantern. A man-shaped shadow stood inside the shed, visible only because the lantern's glow passed through the open slats in the wall. Owen raised his flashlight and the shape did not move. It was tall, broad-shouldered, standing still in the dark. He asked who was there. The shadow lifted one hand. Owen expected a wave. Instead, the hand moved to the face and peeled something away. That was the moment his mind refused to keep up. The thing inside the shed did not have a face under the shadow. It had a darker place where a face should have been, as if the dark itself had learned how to wear human proportions. The lantern flame flickered, And for one instant Owen saw a mouth open too wide, not in anger, not in hunger, but in recognition. As if it knew him. He stumbled backward onto the gravel. The lantern rolled at his feet. The thing stepped out of the shed without a sound, and with each step its outline changed. First too tall, then too narrow, then almost normal, then wrong again. It never fully chose one shape. It kept failing at being seen. Owen ran to his truck and locked the doors. When he started the engine, the passenger side window was already fogged from the inside. On the glass, written in a finger through the mist, was a single word. Home. By the time he looked again, it was gone. 3 encounters, 3 different stretches of the mountains, 3 witnesses who understood the woods well enough to know when something had crossed a line it should not have crossed. A thing that walked ahead of a man and wore his pace like a stolen coat. A child in the leaves that unfolded into something too tall for the trail. A lantern in the dark with no face behind it. None of them appear in ranger logs. None of them show up in wildlife reports, but the pattern is there if you know how to look for it. The Appalachian Mountains have always been good at keeping secrets. The real question is not whether something is out there. It is how many times it has already learned the shape of us. If you want, I can turn this into a tighter YouTube narration script with stronger hook lines and more brutal cliffhanger endings between the 3 stories. I found a staircase in the Appalachian Mountains that shouldn't exist. I've spent most of my life in the Appalachian Mountains, not hiking them, living in them. There's a difference. Tourists see waterfalls, overlooks, and trails marked neatly on maps. People who grow up here see the other side of the mountains, the abandoned roads that disappeared from county records, the collapsed mining camps swallowed by the forest, the places locals avoid without ever explaining why. The older people always had rules. Don't whistle after dark. Don't answer voices in the woods. And if you ever find stairs standing alone in the forest, leave immediately. I thought it was just another mountain superstition, until I found them. And now I understand why nobody talks about what happens if you climb them. It happened 3 years ago during late October. The leaves had already fallen, exposing miles of gray woods and bare branches. I was helping a friend search for a hunting dog that had gone missing near a remote section of forest outside western North Carolina. The dog had vanished 2 days earlier. No tracks, no blood, no sign of a bear attack, just gone. The owner was desperate. By noon we'd split up to cover more ground. I followed an old logging trail that wasn't marked on any map. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. At first I didn't notice. Then I realized I hadn't heard birds for nearly an hour. No squirrels, no insects, nothing. The silence felt wrong, not peaceful, watching. The trail eventually ended at a steep hillside covered in dead leaves. That's where I saw the stairs. They stood completely alone, concrete, gray, weathered, about 15 steps leading nowhere. No foundation, no house, no ruins, nothing attached to them, just a staircase rising from the middle of untouched forest. For a moment I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. I walked around them twice. The concrete was old, covered in moss, tree roots wrapped around the lower steps. Whatever structure had once existed there should have left debris, bricks, wood, metal, anything. There was nothing, only the staircase standing by itself, waiting. I remembered what old locals used to say, leave immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a picture. The screen froze, black, battery dead. It had been at 80% 5 minutes earlier. I laughed nervously and shoved it into my pocket. Then I noticed something else. There were footprints in the leaves, fresh ones, leading up the stairs, none coming down. I stared at them for several seconds. One person, heavy boots, adult-sized. The tracks ended on the top step. After that, nothing, no continuation, no return path, just gone. A cold feeling spread through my stomach. I should have left. Instead, I climbed. 1 step, 2, 3. The forest seemed normal. 4, 5, 6. The wind stopped. 7, 8, 9. Every sound disappeared. Even my own breathing seemed distant. 10, 11, 12. By the time I reached the top, the silence was absolute. I turned around and nearly fell off. The forest was gone, not physically, it was still there, but every tree stood perfectly still, not moving, not swaying, frozen like a photograph. The clouds overhead weren't moving either. Neither were the leaves. The entire world had stopped. I looked down at my watch. The second hand wasn't ticking. Time itself had frozen. Panic hit me instantly. I jumped off the stairs. The moment my feet touched the ground, everything moved again. Wind rushed through branches. Leaves rattled. Birds called somewhere in the distance. Time resumed. I stood there shaking, trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Then something spoke behind me. Do it again. The voice sounded exactly like mine. I spun around. Nobody. The woods were empty. Do it again. My own voice, coming from somewhere among the trees. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. I started walking downhill. The voice followed, always distant, always hidden, always sounding exactly like me. For nearly 20 minutes it repeated the same sentence. Do it again, do it again, do it again. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I was halfway back to the logging trail when I noticed movement ahead. Someone was standing between the trees. At first I thought it was another hiker. Then I realized I was looking at myself. Same height, same jacket, same beard, same face. It stood about 50 yards away, completely motionless. Watching me, I froze, so did it. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then I raised my flashlight. The thing copied me perfectly like a reflection, except reflections shouldn't exist in the middle of a forest. I lowered my light. It lowered its light. Then it smiled. I wasn't smiling. The thing turned and walked into the trees. I ran. Branches whipped across my face. Leaves exploded beneath my boots. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. When I slammed the door and looked back toward the woods, the thing was standing at the edge of the tree line, still smiling, still wearing my face. I drove home. I never told anyone, not for months. Eventually I convinced myself I'd imagined everything: stress, fatigue, fear. There had to be an explanation. Then winter came. One night I woke up around 3 in the morning. Something was standing in my backyard. I saw it through the bedroom window. My motion light illuminated its face, my face. It was staring directly at me, not moving, not blinking, just watching. The next morning there were footprints in the snow. They led from the woods to my window and stopped. No tracks leading away, only tracks leading toward the house. The same way the footprints only went up the staircase, never down. That's when I understood something. Whatever I met in those mountains never followed me home. It had been waiting there long before I arrived. The staircase wasn't a structure, it was a doorway. And the moment I climbed it, something came down while I was looking the other way. I moved 6 months later, different county, different house, different mountain range, it didn't matter. Every few weeks I still wake up around 3 in the morning, and whenever I look outside, there's always someone standing at the edge of the trees, too far away to see clearly, too still to be human, watching, waiting, smiling, and every year it stands a little closer. This version uses a much slower psychological build, a single continuous narrative, a doppelganger threat, and a lingering ending instead of the cryptid encounter structure from the script you provided. It feels more personal, more claustrophobic, and leaves the listener with one terrifying image that stays in their head after the story ends. The first time I heard the voice, I thought it was my brother. That was the problem. It sounded exactly like him. Same rough edge, same slow breath between words, same way he said my name like he was annoyed I had made him repeat it. And then the voice said something that made the blood leave my face. Don't come up here alone. My brother was dead. He had been dead for 11 days. I know because I buried him myself. That was the night the mountains started calling me. I was driving back through western Virginia after the funeral, taking the old mountain road because I wanted to be alone. I had no business being on that road after dark. The fog was thick enough to hide the guardrail, and the trees on both sides looked like they had grown too close to the pavement, leaning in like they were listening. My truck radio was off. No music, no news, just the sound of tires on wet asphalt. Then out of nowhere, the speaker cracked alive. At first it was only static. Then a voice came through, weak and broken, like it was speaking from very far away. "Ben!" I hit the brakes so hard my coffee spilled across the seat. The voice came again. "Ben, listen to me." It was my brother's voice. Not close to him, not similar, his exact voice. The same voice I had heard my whole life. I looked at the dashboard. The station number was blank. The radio wasn't even on. Then the voice said the one thing only my brother would know. "The tree is still standing." My hands went numb. Because there was only one tree he could mean. A black oak deep in the Appalachian woods, behind our grandfather's land. A tree we climbed as kids. A tree my brother carved our initials into when we were 12. A tree we never talked about after what happened there. The radio cut out. The road curved sharply uphill, and when I reached the top, my headlights caught an old dirt pull-off hidden between the pines. I don't know why I stopped. Something in me already knew the answer. The oak was still there. It stood at the edge of the clearing like a witness that refused to die. Tall, split down the middle, hollow at the base. Our initials were still carved into the bark. B&E. 3 decades old. I had not been there in 14 years. I should have left right then. Instead, I got out of the truck. The air was colder up there, not mountain cold. Wrong cold. The kind that settles inside your chest and stays there. There was a smell in the clearing too. Wet dirt. Rot. And something metallic underneath it, like old blood washed into the soil. I walked to the tree and shined my flashlight into the hollow trunk. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw a shape inside. Something pale. Something small. I reached in, and my fingers touched hair. Human hair. I snatched my hand back so fast I stumbled into the mud. The thing inside the tree moved. Not a rustle, not a shift. A deliberate movement. Like something waking up. I backed away, light shaking in my hand. Then I saw what had been hidden in the hollow. A shoe. A child's shoe. Brown leather, dirt-caked, the kind with a little brass buckle. My brother had worn that exact shoe the night he disappeared. I know because my mother had kept it in a drawer for 14 years, wrapped in a cloth because she could never bring herself to throw it away. And now it was sitting inside the tree. My stomach turned. I heard a sound behind me. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Close enough that I felt it on the back of my neck. I turned. Nothing. Only the woods. Only the black trunks and dead leaves, and the kind of darkness that makes your eyes useless. Then my truck alarm went off. The noise was so loud it nearly made me scream. The headlights flashed once, twice, then went dead. The clearing dropped into complete darkness. And in that darkness, a voice came from the tree. Not from the radio. Not from the truck. From inside the hollow oak. Ben. It was my brother again. But this time it was wrong. The voice had the right shape, but something was missing from it. Like an echo of a person instead of the person himself. Ben, come closer. I stumbled backward. My heel hit something soft in the leaves. I looked down. A hand. Not a corpse, not bones. A hand. Human, gray-white, half buried in the dirt with the fingers twitching in tiny jerks. I screamed and ran. I ran straight through the brush, tearing my jacket on branches, slipping in wet roots, not stopping until I hit the road and my truck lights suddenly came back on by themselves. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember starting the engine. I only remember the rearview mirror. There was someone standing in the back of my truck. At first, I thought it was my brother. The same height. The same shoulders. the same jacket he had been buried in. Then the figure raised its head, and I saw that the face was not a face at all. It was smooth. Not skin. Smooth like something unfinished. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. Just a pale blank shape that leaned toward me from the backseat, as if trying to remember what a human looked like. I drove without thinking, screaming through bends, missing turns, almost going off the mountain twice. When I finally got home, I locked every door, checked every window, and sat on my kitchen floor until morning with the lights on. That should have been the end of it. It was. The next day, my mother called. Her voice was shaking. She asked me if I had been messing around with my brother's old room. I told her no. She said, "Then why is his shoe missing?" My blood went cold. I drove to her house immediately. She was sitting at the kitchen table, pale and exhausted, with my brother's old shoe in front of her. The same shoe I had seen inside the tree. She swore it had been locked in the drawer for years. That morning, the drawer had been open. The shoe had been sitting on the bed, and inside it was a handful of black dirt. Dirt from the mountain. Dirt that smelled like rot. That night, I made a terrible mistake. I went back. I told myself I was going to prove it was a hallucination. A trick of grief. A breakdown. Anything except what I already knew in my gut. The road was empty when I returned to the pull-off. The tree was still standing, but now there were more marks in the bark. Fresh ones, carved deep in the trunk beneath our childhood initials. A new set of initials. Mine. I had not carved them. I had never been there before. But there they were, jagged and raw, as if someone had done it with shaking hands. My hands. The ground around the tree had been disturbed. Dozens of footprints circled the trunk. Bare feet. Some small. Some large. Some so deep they looked like whatever made them had been heavy enough to sink into the earth. I pointed my flashlight into the hollow. At first I saw only darkness. Then I saw faces. Not one. Many. Pressed together in the trunk like people trapped behind glass. Their mouths open. Their eyes wide. Silent. Watching me from inside the tree. Then one of them moved forward. My brother. His face was there for 1 second, pale and swollen and full of terror. He opened his mouth and screamed without sound. The faces behind him began moving too, pushing toward the opening, as if something deeper inside the tree had woken and they were trying not to be pulled in. I stumbled backward. The oak gave a long, slow creak. Then the trunk split wider. Something inside shifted. Not one body. Many. Too many. Lined in the dark space beyond the bark. Packed in layers like the tree was full of people standing upright in the hollow earth. And then I heard the voice again. But this time it wasn't my brother. It was everyone. Hundreds of voices whispering at once, all saying the same thing in different tones. Stay. I ran. Branches snapped behind me. The whole hillside seemed to breathe. Something moved through the woods beside the road, keeping pace with me without ever showing itself. I could hear it. Not footsteps. Dragging. A slow, wet dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through leaves. When I reached my truck, the driver's side door was already open. Inside on the seat was my brother's old shoe. And next to it was a second one. Mine. The one I had been wearing. Except I wasn't wearing it anymore. I looked down. My right foot was bare. I don't remember losing the shoe. I don't remember taking it off. I only remember looking at the dark woods and realizing something had been walking beside me the entire time. Something that had learned my shape from the mountain. Something that had followed me home the first night. And if I had stayed long enough to see it clearly, I don't think it would have been wearing my face anymore. Not by then. Because in the Appalachian Mountains, some things do not chase you. They wait until you answer.